Sandy was so earnest and so confident of the good qualities of this weed that to please him rather than from any conviction of his excellence, I was induced to take it. He had been to me the good Samaritan and had almost providentially found me and helped me when I could not help myself. How did I know but that the hand of the Lord was in it? With thoughts of this sort, I took the roots from Sandy and I put them in my right-hand pocket. This was, of course, Sunday morning. Sandy now urged me to go home with all speed and to walk up bravely to the house as though nothing had happened. I saw in Sandy too deep an insight into the human nature with all his superstition not to have some respect for his advice, and perhaps too a slight gleam or shadow of his superstition had fallen upon me. At any rate, I started off toward Edward fucking Covey's as directed by Sandy. Having the previous night poured my griefs into Sandy's ears, I got him enlisted in my behalf, having made his wife a sharer in my sorrows, and having also become well refreshed by sleep and food, I moved off quite courageously toward the much dreaded Edward fucking Covey's. Singularly enough, just as I entered his yard gate, I met him and his wife dressed in their Sunday best, looking as smiling as angels on their way to church. The manner of Edward fucking Covey astonished me. There was something really benignant in his countenance. He spoke to me as never before, told me that the pigs had got into the lot and he wished me to drive them out, inquired how I was, and seemed an altered man. This extraordinary conduct of Edward fucking Covey really made me begin to think that Sandy's herb had more virtue in it than I, and my pride, had been willing to allow. And had the day been other than Sunday, I should have attributed Edward fucking Covey's altered manner solely to the magic power of the root. I suspected, however, that the Sabbath and not the root was the real explanation of Edward fucking Covey's manner. His religion hindered him from breaking the Sabbath, but not from breaking my skin. He had more respect for the day than for the man, for whom the day was mercifully given. For while he would cut and slash my body during the week, he would not hesitate on Sunday to teach me the value of my soul, or the way of life and salvation by Jesus Christ. All went well with me till Monday morning, and then whether the root had lost its virtue or whether my tormentor had gone deeper into the black art than myself, as was sometimes said of him, whether he had obtained a special indulgence for his faithful Sabbath day's worship, it was not necessary for me to know or to inform the reader, but this I may say, the pious and benignant smile which graced Edward fucking Covey's face on Sunday wholly disappeared on Monday. Long before daylight, I was called up to go and feed, rub, and curry the horses. I obeyed the call, and would have so obeyed it had it been made at an earlier hour, for I had brought my mind to a firm resolve during that Sunday's reflection, viz. To obey every order, however unreasonable, if it were possible, and if Mr. Edward fucking Covey should then undertake to beat me, to defend and protect myself to the best of my ability. My religious views on the subject of resisting my master had suffered a serious shock by the savage persecution to which I had been subjected, and my hands were no longer tied by my religion. Master Thomas's indifference had served the last link. I had now, to this extent, backslidden from this point in the slave's religious creed, and I soon had occasion to make my fallen state known to my Sunday pious brother, Edward fucking Covey. Whilst I was obeying his order to feed and get the horses ready for the field, and when in the act of going up the stable loft for the purpose of throwing down some blades, Edward fucking Covey sneaked into the stable in his particular snake-like way, and seizing me suddenly by the leg, he brought me to the stable floor, giving my newly mended body a fearful jar. I now forgot my roots, and I remembered my pledge to stand up in my own defense. The brute was endeavoring skillfully to get a slip knot on my legs before I could draw up my feet. As soon as I found what he was up to, I gave a sudden spring. My 2 days' rest had been of much service to me, and by that means, no doubt, he was able to bring me to the floor so heavily. He was defeated in his plan of tying me. While down, he seemed to think he had me very securely in his power. He little thought he was, as a rowdy say, in for a rough and tumble fight. And such was the fact, whence came the daring spirit necessary to grapple with a man who, 8 and 40 hours later, could, with the slightest word, have made me tremble like a leaf in the storm. I do not know. At any rate, I was resolved to fight. And what was better still, I was actually hard at it. He was defeated and he was trying to tie this motherfucker. While down, he seemed to think he had me very securely in his power. He little thought he was, as the rowdy say, in for a rough and tumble fight. But such was the fact, whence came the daring spirit necessary to grapple with a man 48 hours before could, with the slightest word, have made me tremble like a leaf in a storm. I do not know. At any rate, I was resolved to fight. And what was better still, I was actually hard at it. The fighting madness had come upon me, and I found my strong fingers firmly attached to the throat of my cowardly tormentor, heedless consequences at the moment, as though we stood as equals before the law. The very color of the man was forgotten. I felt as supple as a cat and was ready for the snakish creature at every turn. His every blow of his was parried, though I dealt no blows in turn. I was strictly on the defensive, preventing him from injuring me rather than trying to injure him. I flung him on the ground several times when he meant to have hurled me there. I held him so firmly by the throat that his blood followed my nails. He held me and I held him. All was fair thus far, and the contest was about equal. My resistance was entirely unexpected, and Edward fucking Covey was taken all back by it, for he trembled in every limb. "Are you going to resist, you scoundrel?" he said. Are you going to resist? Just like the cops. He's resisting, he's resisting. To which I returned a polite, "Yes, sir," steadily gazing my interrogator in the eye to meet the first approach or dawning of the blow which I expected my answer would call forth, but the conflict did not long remain thus equal. Edward fucking Covey soon cried out lustily for help, not that I was attaining any marked advantage over him or was injuring him, but because he was gaining none over me and was not able single-handedly to conquer me. He called for his cousin Hughes to come to his assistance, and now the scene was changed. I was compelled to give blows as well as parry them, and since I was in any case to suffer for resistance, I felt, as the musty proverb goes, that I might as well be hanged for an old sheep as a lamb. I was still defensive towards Edward fucking Covey, but aggressive towards Hughes, and at the first approach of the latter, I dealt a blow of my desperation, which fairly sickened my youthful assailant. He went off, bending over with pain and manifesting no disposition to come within my reach again. The poor fellow was in the act of trying to catch and tie my right hand. While flattering himself with success, I gave him the kick, which sent him staggering away in pain at the same time that I held Covey with the firm hand. Taken completely by surprise, Edward fucking Covey seemed to have lost his usual strength and coolness. He was frightened and stood puffing and blowing, seemingly unable to command words or blows. When he saw that poor Hughes was standing half bent with pain, his courage quite gone, the cowardly tyrant asked if I meant to persist in my resistance. I told him I did mean to resist, come what might. I told him I did mean to resist, come what might. That I had been by him treated like a brute during the last 6 months, and that I should stand it no longer. With that, he gave me a shake, and he attempted to drag me towards a stick of wood that was lying just outside the stable door. He meant to knock me down with it, but just as he leaned over to get the stick, I seized him with both hands by the collar, and with a vigorous and sudden snatch, I brought my assailant harmlessly and full length on the not over clean ground, for we were now in the cow yard. He had selected a place for the fight, and it was but right that he should have all the advantages of his own selection. By this time, Bill, the hired man, came home. He had been to Mr. Himley's to spend the Sunday with his nominal wife. He was going home on Monday to go to work. Covey and I had been skirmishing from the daybreak till now that the sun was almost shooting its beams over the eastern woods, and we were still at it. I could not see where the matter was to terminate. He evidently was afraid to let me go, lest I should again make off to the woods. Otherwise, he would probably have obtained arms from the house to frighten me. Holding me, Edward fucking Covey called upon Bill for assistance. The scene here is something comic about it. Bill, who knew precisely what Edward fucking Covey wished him to do, affected ignorance and pretended he did not know what to do. "What shall I do, Mr. Covey?" said Bill. "Take a hold of him? Take a hold of him?" said Covey, with a toss of his head peculiar to Bill. He said, "Indeed, Mr. Covey, I want to go to work." "This is your work," said Covey. "Take a hold of him." Bill replied with spirit, "My master hired me here to work, not to help you whip Frederick." "It is now my turn to speak, Bill," said I. "Don't you put your hands on me." To which he replied, "My God, Frederick, I ain't going to touch you." And Bill walked off, leaving Covey and myself to settle our matters as we best might. But my present advantage was threatened when I saw Caroline, the slave woman of Edward fucking Covey, come to the cow yard to milk, for she was a powerful woman and could have mastered me very easily, exhausted as I now was. As soon as she came into the yard, Edward fucking Covey attempted to rally her to his aid. Strangely, and I may add fortunately, Caroline was in no humor to take a hand in any such sport. We were all in open rebellion that morning. Caroline answered the command of her master to take a hold of me precisely as Bill had answered, but in her it was at great peril so to answer. She was the slave of Covey, Edward fucking Covey, and he could do what he pleased with her. It was not so much with Bill, and Bill knew it. Samuel Harris, to which Bill belonged, did not allow his slaves to be beaten unless they were guilty of some crimes which the law would punish. But poor Caroline, like myself, was at the mercy of the merciless Edward fucking Covey. Did not she escape the dire effects of her refusal? He gave her several sharp blows. Covey, at length, 2 hours had elapsed, gave up the contest, let me go, he said, puffing and blowing at a greater rate. Now, you scoundrel, go to your work. I would not have whipped you half so much as I have had you not resisted. The fact was, he had not whipped me at all. He had not, in all the scuffle, drawn a single drop of blood from me. I had drawn blood from him, and even without this satisfaction, I should have been victorious, because my aim had not been to injure him, but to prevent his injuring me. During the whole 6 months that I lived with Edward fucking Covey, after this transaction, he never laid on me with the weight of his finger in anger. He would occasionally say he did not want to have to get a hold of me again, a declaration which I had no difficulty in believing, and I had a secret feeling which answered, you need not wish to get a hold of me again, for you will likely come off worse in the second fight than you did the first. Yes, my dear reader, this battle with Mr. Edward fucking Covey, undignified as it was, and as I fear my narration of it is, was a turning point in my life as a slave. It rekindled in my breast the smoldering embers of liberty. It brought up my Baltimore dreams and revived a sense of my own manhood. I was a changed being after that fight. I was nothing more. I was a man now. I recalled to life my crushed self-respect and my self-confidence, and inspired me with a renewed determination to be a free man. A man without force is without the essential dignity of humanity. Human nature is so constituted that it cannot honor a helpless man, although it can pity him. And even this it cannot do long, even if the signs of power do not arise. He can only understand the effect of this combat on my spirit, who has himself incurred something hazarded, something in repelling the unjust and cruel aggressions of a tyrant. Edward fucking Covey was a tyrant, and a cowardly one withal. After resisting him, I felt, as I had never felt before, as a resurrection from the dark and pestiferous tomb of slavery to the heaven of comparative freedom. I was no longer a servile coward trembling under the frown of a brother warm of the dust, but my long-cowed spirit was roused to an attitude of manly independence. I had reached a point at which I was not afraid to die. This spirit made me a free man, in fact, while I remained a slave in form. When a slave cannot be flogged, he is more than half free. He is a domain as broad as his own manly heart to defend, and he is really a power on earth. While slaves prefer their lives with flogging to instant death, they always find Christians enough like unto Covey to accommodate that preference. From this time until that of my escape from slavery, I was never fairly whipped. Several attempts were made to whip me, but there were always unsuccessful bruises I did get, as I shall hereafter inform the reader. But the case I have been describing was the end of the brutification to which slavery has subjected me. The reader will be glad to know why, after I had so grievously offended Edward fucking Covey, did not have me taken in hand by the authorities. Indeed, why the law of Maryland, which assigns hanging to the slave who resists his master, was not put in force against me. At any rate, why I was not taken up, as is usual in such cases, and publicly whipped, for an example, to other slaves, as a means of deterring me from committing the same offense again. I confess that the easy manner in which I got off for a long time a surprise to me, and I cannot even now fully explain the cause. The only explanation I can venture to suggest is the fact that Edward fucking Covey was probably ashamed to have it known, and confessed that he had been mastered by a boy of 16. Mr. Covey enjoyed the unbounded and very valuable reputation of being a first-rate overseer and a Negro breaker. By means of this reputation, he was able to procure his hands for very trifling compensation, with a very great ease. His interest and his pride mutually suggested the passing the matter of by in silence. The story that he had undertaken to whip a lad and had been resisted was of itself sufficient to damage him, for his bearing should, in the estimation of slaveholders, be of that imperial order that should make such an occurrence impossible.